Hello, everyone. This is Philippa Benson, the managing editor of CABI Agriculture and Bioscience, CABI's open access multidisciplinary journal. Today, I'll be presenting a webinar on how to understand and avoid plagiarism. This is a question and a problem that many authors have, particularly those who are non-native speakers of English. And I'm going to give you some definitions of plagiarism, as well as some concrete and specific advice on how to avoid plagiarism. So starting off, it is important to understand that there is a central tool, an idea to remember to avoid plagiarism, and that is to learn to use citations properly. In this webinar, I'll define what plagiarism is in the context of scientific writing, how it is detected, and what you can do to avoid it unintentionally. I'll also give you concrete and specific examples and advice about how to avoid plagiarism and therefore how to improve your chances of getting your manuscript into review and eventually published. So again, moving on to the main topic of the day, I remind you again that there's a counterpoint. Understanding what plagiarism is and how to avoid it is the flip side of that coin, is understanding how to use citations and when to use citations. If you can learn this concept and the tools for doing this, you will avoid plagiarizing text. And this is sort of like riding a bicycle. Once you get the idea and once you develop the tools for using citations correctly and powerfully, you won't need to worry about plagiarizing text. So, moving on, I want to take one step back to remind everybody in the audience that it's really, really important to remember all the different audiences that are involved in writing, in the day-to-day writing tasks that you have to do when you're involved in research. The different audiences overlap throughout the research cycle. And although you may be thinking of these audiences when you're sitting down to write your manuscript, or a cover letter, or responses to reviewers, or grant proposals, or other documents, you need to consider these audiences throughout the research process because they come into play all the time in different ways. Remember that plagiarism is considered intellectual theft. It is considered stealing. So if a person is found to have plagiarized, that will haunt them throughout their entire career. So researchers at the beginning of their careers may begin to think about plagiarism when they're writing their scholarly text, and particularly when they're getting ready to submit. But they need to think about that process throughout the entire process. So obviously thinking about your co-authors and your colleagues when you're drafting your scholarly article, that goes without saying. But also you need to bear in mind the institution that you're working in. That needs to be considered when you're drafting and getting ready to submit, because problems with plagiarism often can go to institutional ethics boards and have very negative consequences for the authors who have been accused. The same goes for funders. Funders, if they know that someone that they've given funding to has been accused, much less found to have plagiarized, this will have long-lasting implications on a person's career. Publishers also look very negatively on authors who have plagiarized, and publishers have multiple mechanisms in place to detect plagiarism, some of which I will tell you about today. And of course, you need to think about the editors and the reviewers and the publication staff who get involved when plagiarism is detected. Accusations of plagiarism take up a huge amount of time of editors, reviewers, and staff. And being an author accused of plagiarism will make it much harder for you to get into review and published in the future. Authors who have been accused of plagiarism also need to think about how the word will spread through their professional societies and perhaps through news and social media. It will not be good for your reputation. The point here is thinking about all these stakeholders and the implications for you need to be kept in mind as you and your co-authors are writing and drafting any portion of your text, because if you are found to have plagiarized, it will be problematic for you very long term. So, moving on now, we need to think about the idea of how you avoid plagiarism, and you do that by citing the sources that you're using. So everyone in science acknowledges that new knowledge is built on existing knowledge. You don't need to hide the fact that you have taken an idea from a previous source. That is part of building new information. So the trick in not plagiarizing is not taking someone else's ideas or their text or their graphics or anything else without citing the original source. It is accepted in the academy, in academia, in intellectual circles, and throughout the institutions of higher learning that new knowledge is built on existing knowledge. So a new and original idea has a base and a strong base. And learning how to use sources and acknowledge those sources actually is a positive thing. So the advantages of citing sources is that it allows your readers to locate the origins of your ideas, the things that informed and inspired you to create your new ideas. It shows your willingness to have readers verify your interpretation of the work of others. It shows that you understand the intellectual context of the problems you're researching, and it actually enhances your credibility by proving that you're well informed about your topic and that your new work and your ideas can be trusted. So there are many, many profound advantages to learning how to cite your sources. So what is plagiarism then? Plagiarism is when you use the, what is plagiarism then? Plagiarism is when you use text, illustrations, designs, ideas, structures, including language structures, or any other work that has been developed by someone else and claiming that those materials are your own original work. You're even committing plagiarism when you use your own previously published materials without acknowledging the original published source. So you are considered to be self-plagiarizing when you use your own text or figures in more than one publication without citing the first original use of that idea, the text, the graphics, or whatever. So you commit plagiarism When you use someone else's ideas or language without acknowledging, number one, that you did not create the ideas or the language. Number two, who did create the ideas or the language. And number three, where you found those ideas and that language. You need to cite those three things. You need to acknowledge those three things. Now, what does the law say about plagiarism? Before, remember, I noted that you are considered to be stealing if you've taken intellectual possessions of somebody else or the intellectual creations of somebody else without acknowledging them. So international academic conventions are supported by laws that say that ideas and the written expression of ideas can be owned, and that the authors, the creators, own the particular set of words or phrases that they created to express a new idea. So under copyright law, a creator legally owns ideas, unless they're common knowledge, like the sky is blue. I'll talk about that in a minute or two. The words used to express those ideas, the syntax and style in which those words are laid out, and any related images. In other words, you are considered to be stealing by law if you use the words, ideas, images, or other related content without giving credit to the original author. That's the key. You have to give credit to the original author. So there are different types of plagiarism. One is cloned text. When you submit someone else's work, their words, exactly word for word as your own, without putting quotation marks and without giving a citation. You can have copy and pasting of text, which is, generally speaking, about 5 consecutive words in a row from a single source without citation. That's called, there are many different labels for these, but this is generally copy and pasting. There's hybrid texting, where you're combining different passages or different sections of sentences from a single text, again, without citation. You can have mashed text when you're combining different passages from multiple sources with no or with incomplete citations or inaccurate citations. Finding and replacing text, but retaining the essential context. So if you're changing out keywords or phrases and doing that without citation, that is also considered plagiarism. Remixing, paraphrasing, or using reworded content without citation is considered plagiarism. Or, and this is sort of a side note here, if you draw information from the internet, not a standard publication, you still need to cite that information, and you need to cite when you looked at it, when you viewed it on the internet. And ideally, if you're going to do something like that, you should save a copy of the web page, and you absolutely must have a viewed date. So you tell people when you saw that information on the internet. So the point here, the point that I want you to pay attention to, is what's marked in orange or red here. These are, you are committing plagiarism if you do not cite the original source. That's the key. You need to cite the original source. So if you cite the original source, you won't be plagiarizing. So how is plagiarism detected, particularly in scientific journals? Well, it's a combination of technology and human intervention. In terms of technology, many journals these days start by tapping into a service called Authenticate. And it is a service, it's a database that is used by Crossref as well as other companies. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. And they have software that can draw on millions and millions of records and do explicit matching. So Crossref is an organization that assigns permanent identifiers, permanent tags, digital object identifiers to documents. And with Authenticate and Crossref together, they can search through the actual full, complete content of all those records that have DOIs. So Crossref has in particular a tool that's called a Similarity Check. And that Similarity Check compares new manuscripts coming into a journal to content that has already been published or already been tagged and given a DOI from millions and millions and millions of journals, books, patents, dissertations, preprint servers, internet pages, and other sources. So the Similarity Check used by Crossref, which is powered by Authenticate, does a word-by-word match of already published content to the submission that is coming in to a particular journal. So similarity checks detect duplication of exact English language phrases. Now, every journal sets up their similarity check a little bit differently. So they might say, we want you to check 4 words in a row, or 7 words in a row, or 10 words in a row. Every journal is a little bit different, but it's English language phrases. And journals also check figures and photographs for manipulation or duplication. So you need to remember that these tools, the Authenticate Crossref similarity checks, are used in addition to careful peer review and editor assessment. And they do check materials that have been published under open access or any other kind of Creative Commons license. So the point here is that many journals use Authenticate and similarity checks through Crossref, but detection is also done by human beings with subject matter expertise. I can tell you, as an editor who has worked on many journals, the most sort of deeply embedded instances of plagiarism have been brought to my attention, not by technology, but by editors who know the literature very deeply and very broadly and very well, and know when ideas, maybe not exact language, but ideas and prior publications have been used to put forth what the author is claiming is a new idea, and actually it's been previously published. So again, these tools are used in addition to careful human expert peer review and editor assessment. So this is a screenshot of a similarity check. So just to give you an example of what one looks like. So when journals run similarity checks, some journals do it at with all new submissions. Some journals do it only when manuscripts come back in after they've gone through one round of revision. But the similarity checks actually show in the reports where there are matches between previously published materials, where they what percentage of the materials are drawn from previously published materials, and what exact parts of a previously published paper has been plagiarized. So these similarity checks are astoundingly accurate and complete. You should know that most journals, when they're setting up the similarity checks that they run their manuscripts through, they do not run those checks on methods and materials sections of manuscripts. They take those out of the check, nor do they run on reference sections, because those are so similar so much of the time. So this isn't necessarily every journal, but most journals take out the material and method sections and the reference sections from the similarity check assessments. Now, what happens when editors are made aware that there may be plagiarism in a submitted manuscript? What do when they think authors have committed plagiarism? Remembering that plagiarism is considered theft. It's stealing, and it's treated very, very seriously. So when editors suspect that an author has committed plagiarism, they might conduct an investigation themselves or request that the lead authors themselves or the institutions or the departments look into this. When they have confirmed that there is plagiarism, the editors may report it to the top level of the author's institutions, or they may report it to the funders who have given the authors money to do that study. They may immediately ban the authors, if plagiarism is confirmed, from ever submitting to that journal again. If the authors think that you may have committed unintentional plagiarism, they may be kind and just simply ask you to rewrite the manuscript. But that is not a good position to be in. You should avoid that if possible. But if you've got really thoughtful, considerate editors, that may be an outcome. More often, though, if plagiarism is detected and confirmed, it will go up the ladder in your department, in your institution, and in your funders, and will have very long-term consequences. So, a couple of other notes. When there is text in an original source that you are drawing from that reflects common knowledge, as I said previously, something like the sky is blue, or that many plant species cannot produce seeds in the absence of pollinators. That's fairly well known. You can paraphrase that without citing the original source. Without pollinators, many plant species cannot produce seeds, or many plant species cannot produce seeds without pollinators. Those kinds of rewording are okay to do for common knowledge without citation. However, if you quote an original source directly, use that original text word for word, then you must cite the original source. So, what are the strategies that you can use to avoid plagiarism? And here they are: quote, summarize, paraphrase, and summarize. So, what can you do to avoid plagiarizing? Here are the 3 strategies: quote, paraphrase, and summarize. So you can use, if you quote directly, you have to use quotation marks and make sure that you use the original author's words exactly word for word. And you can use a long quote or a short quote. Quoting directly is not very common in scientific literature. It's more used as a writing strategy in the humanities, but you can certainly do it in the sciences if you want, but make sure that you are quoting directly and accurately. If you paraphrase, that means restating the original idea in your own words, rephrasing in your own words. Or you can summarize an entire idea rather than individual kind of units or sentences of ideas. So those are the 3 strategies that you can use. But no matter what, for each one, you have to cite the original source. So step 1, one way or the other, is when you are studying, when you are pulling the materials together to write your manuscript, you have to take extremely accurate notes of where you got the source information from, who wrote it, when they wrote it, what paper, and ideally, if you have, for example, a PDF, what page it came from, just for your own memory. You have to have extremely accurate notes about your original sources. You can avoid quoting those actual words. You can rephrase them, but where you got them from needs to be accurately recorded. So if you use direct quotes, you should make sure that the words that you write down are 100% accurate and that you provide the exact information about where the quote came from. And unless there's a super compelling reason, avoid using too many direct quotes from the same person. Now, again, there are a lot of cultural differences here. In some cultures, it's thought to be honoring someone to use their exact language, but it can be thought to be honoring someone to use their exact language, but in scientific writing today, in modern scientific writing, it is not a good idea to use many, many instances of the exact language of another author. And no matter what, you always need to acknowledge where you have taken material from, words, ideas, language, images, and you need to cite the original source. When you paraphrase, you should take these steps. Rephrase the idea in your own words, restate, make sure that you are properly paraphrasing the ideas, both in terms of the words and the sentence structure, without changing the original meaning. Okay, I'm going to do that again. What is paraphrasing? Paraphrasing is when you rephrase an idea in your own words. Paraphrase materials are a restatement of someone else's ideas in your own words. Properly paraphrased material has changes in both the words and the sentence structure from the original without changing the content or the meaning of the original. I'll be giving you some examples of these in a minute. Changing a few words or phrases of original sentence is not proper paraphrasing. And one way or the other, when you paraphrase, you must cite the original source. Again, I cannot underscore this often enough. So, to paraphrase correctly, step one is to make sure that you fully understand the meaning of the original text. And when you're sure that you really understand the original meaning, then you revise it in your own words. Think that you might be turning to a colleague or turning to a professor and restating that idea in your own words. And then, when you write down your own words, recheck it to make sure that you have not changed the original meaning. Those three things. Make sure in your own head that you understand the original meaning. Revise it, put it in your own language, and then go back and look at your own language and make sure that you have captured it correctly in the paraphrased material that you have generated. So let's look at some examples. So here's an example. The original is, some pollination biologists might assume that the times of peak foraging activity. So let's look at some examples. Some pollination biologists might assume that the times of peak foraging activity by pollinators are the times when most ovules are being fertilized and when most successful seeds are initiated. Here's a paraphrase. Some pollination biologists becomes researchers such as Jones and her colleagues. That's a restatement. And you'll notice that the original citation is in the paraphrase sentence. Then you have might assume that, and it's rephrased, have been exploring the idea that. Then you have times of peak foraging activity, rephrased, paraphrased into peak foraging times, and most successful seeds are initiated becomes most seeds that are successful are initiated. So there you have a paraphrase. The meaning is retained, and importantly, critically importantly, the paraphrased material cites the original source. So it says Jones and her colleagues, 1999, and that text will be referenced in the reference list, in the citation list. So here's another example. The authors have studied the effects of sub-zero temperatures on the mortality of Drosophila megalogaster. So the authors studied versus this study looked at. Sub-zero temperatures are very cold temperatures. Mortality is rephrased as survival or survival rates, and the genus species name is rephrased as the common name. So here you have another example of an original text that's paraphrased. When you paraphrase, you need to be, again, I cannot emphasize strongly enough, very, very sure that you're actually capturing the original meaning. this text here, enforcement of guidelines for the new air quality measurement device accuracy is a government responsibility. That is not an easy sentence to unpack. You cannot assume that all scientific writing is well done, is clear and readable and written in the same way, in the most efficient linguistic fashion. So when you read the original text, you need to really make double sure that you understand the meaning. So here's a revision of that original text. Enforcing the guidelines for the accuracy of the measurements of the new air quality device is a government responsibility. That does have the same meaning, but is a paraphrase of the original. Here's another paraphrase. The government is responsible for enforcing the guidelines for the accuracy of the new device that measures air quality. That actually is a more clear, readable, comprehensible sentence than the original. But one way or the other, you can't assume that the original source is the best written articulation of an idea, and you should feel free to improve the readability and the clarity, but you still have to cite the original source. So remember also that when you are writing up your paper and you are getting ready to submit to a particular journal, you need to use those citations in the style preferred by the journal. Every journal is different, so make sure that you check the instructions to authors and use the correct citation style in both the in-text and final list references. So here are some different examples, but the main point is that you need to check the citation style preferred by the journal you are submitting to. Not every journal uses the same style, so if you submit to a manuscript to one journal and it is rejected for whatever reason, when you go to the next journal, they may have a different citation style, and you are going to need to reformat your citations to match the preferred style of the journal you're submitting to. So just make sure that you're doing that correctly. So in summary, and the short story is, to avoid plagiarism, use citations. Cite the sources that you are using to build your new ideas from. When you paraphrase, make sure that you have thoroughly understood the original information and cite the source. When you use the exact language, put it in quotation marks and cite the source. When you're using information that is not common knowledge, cite the source. In short, if you didn't create the idea or the materials yourself, cite the source. When in doubt, cite the source. And make sure that you are using the citation style of the journal you're submitting to. You can double check this. I strongly advise that you go and look and read some recent articles published in the journal, even if they're not exactly in your field, to look at how other authors who have been accepted and published use citations to build their argument and build the underpinnings of the new information that they are putting forth in their manuscript. So, before I leave you, I want to touch upon a topic that comes up often, particularly for those authors who are non-native writers of English. And many times, authors who are non-native speakers and writers of English, or not mother tongue speakers or writers of English, when they have manuscripts rejected, they automatically will think, well, it's rejected because my writing isn't good, my language isn't good. And I am here to tell you that that is not the case. The primary reasons that articles are rejected include that the topic isn't new, that the science that's being put forth isn't novel. It is not taking a step forward in the realm of knowledge of people who care about that particular topic. The articles are also rejected because the topic of the article submitted to a journal is outside of the scope of that journal. That is a primary reason for rejection. If a paper is better suited to another journal that has a better match for scope and topic, editors who know the landscape of journals that are available to authors will reject an article because they think that it really is a better fit for a different journal. If a paper is scientifically flawed, obviously editors will reject it. And if a journal has published too many papers on that particular topic recently, they may also reject a manuscript just because they need to have some diversity in the realm of the scope of the journal. They need to have a variety of different topics covered within a quarter or a half year or a year of publications of that journal. So in short, manuscripts are rejected due to language or writing problems, most often when the language is so badly written that content simply cannot be understood. In most other cases, if a manuscript is rejected, the rejection is because the information isn't new, or the science isn't rigorous, or it's out of scope for the journal, or it's not timely for that journal. So do not think that a rejection comes because the language in your manuscript isn't perfect. I cannot tell you with more assurance that if editors see a strong, appropriate, rigorously done, novel piece of research in a manuscript and the language isn't perfect, they are not going to let that manuscript go. They're going to keep that manuscript. They're going to work with the authors to improve the language. If the science is good, if it's rigorous, if it's appropriate for the journal, if it is new, whether it is a small step forward or a big step forward, editors are going to keep it. So when you get a rejection, you should not fall back and think it's because my English language is poor, because that is rarely the reason that editors reject manuscripts. So I have here for you a slide with 5 different YouTube videos that go into very, very good detail on techniques of paraphrasing and citing sources. This same table is available on the CABI Author Education Resources page. You can look for the document that says Resources for Learning to Paraphrase, but these are other educational information tools that you can use to learn how to paraphrase. And again, the learning to paraphrase is sort of like riding a bicycle. You have to practice, practice, practice. And as you get your balance and as you get your sense, of how to draw information from others, reword it in your own style and language, and always cite the original source. You will become more and more confident in building new ideas based on previously published information without being concerned about plagiarizing. Learning to paraphrase is a skill that you can learn and master and become expert at.
Before we close today's presentation, I want to encourage you to visit CABI.org for information, publications, and education related to agriculture and biosciences. Specifically, I hope that you will visit CABI Agriculture and Bioscience, CABI's open access multidisciplinary journal. The journal is published in collaboration with BMC, Springer Nature's open access branch, and is led by an editorial board of top-ranking researchers from around the world. The journal is compliant with best practices in publishing for high-impact journals and is committed to publishing rigorously conducted science. We accept both primary and cross-disciplinary studies and those with broad global impacts, as well as studies that reflect more narrow, specific, and local applications. We are committed to thorough, fast, and fair peer review, and again, we're open access with links on both the BMC and CABI websites. I also encourage you to visit AgriArchive, CABI's preprint server. This is a free open access resource for unpublished preprint materials across all the agriculture and biosciences. It's hosted and managed by CABI, and there's no fee for submitting. Materials are posted within 72 hours after a quick review for appropriateness of topic, but the materials are not peer-reviewed, edited, or typeset in any way before being posted online. You'll also find CABI's author education and services portal on the AgriArchive website. Thank you all for listening to this webinar, and if you have any questions or comments, please send them to me at p.benson@cabi.org. Thanks very much.